Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Hayes, and welcome to my short rant for June 25th, 2022. Today's discussion rant is about Russian natural gas embargo, a possible one. They don't have one yet. And the question of whether or not Russian natural gas sales to Europe or embargoes or boycotts of them could be an effective sanction or counter-sanction. So, just to start this off, the IEA is warning that Russia might cut off natural gas supplies to Europe, and you should do something about this, right? This is their warning. And the question is, okay, what's it going to mean? And, I have previously had a rant about Russian oil and how it fits in things. Well, what about natural gas? Okay. And just to get the theory out of the way here, this is based on three nation models of trade. When you have a trade sanction, the key to whether or not or how much of an impact the sanctions have, right? There's always this question of does cutting off interaction with somebody, right? Sanctions are organized non-interaction, right? And I've also heard it referred to in old times as organized non-intercourse, but we're going to leave that alone. The thing about it, though, is that does it do any good, right? And if you don't interact with somebody, some nation, do they just go off and interact with other people, right? And that's the key intuition behind all this. In a three-nation trade model, it turns out that the key thing here is what was the volume of trade between the sanctioner and the target in whatever good you're talking about boycotting or embargoing, and what was the production of that good in the rest of the world. And this is what's so important. I keep pushing this in sanctioning and in so many things economic. It's never bilateral, right? When you're working through a market, the market is a mechanism, and so any kind of volume between two actors is divided by the rest of the market or the rest of the world. So rest of the world, or rho, is the denominator in these interactions. And so the key thing here is if the volume that was traded between the sanctioner and the target prior to the sanctions, whether that be a boycott, I refuse to buy, an embargo, I refuse to sell, whatever the flow, the key thing is, was it more than the rest of the world? Why is that the case? Because if it was more, then when the sanctioner or when a trade barrier is erected, right, the target will try to sell. If the target is the producing nation of the good, then it will try to sell its product in the rest of the world. And the sanctioner will try to replace the imports from the target with imports from the rest of the world. And is there enough stuff out there? It just comes down to, is there enough stuff? If there isn't, then the price, you're going to get a division of prices in the world. The market will be split, and the target will be selling less of its stuff, whatever the product is, over, to the rest of the world at a lower price, while the sanctioner is buying less of the stuff at a higher price. So that's the big problem. Now, okay, what's this got to do with natural gas? Here is an exciting table that shows Russian natural gas exports, right? The volume of natural gas exports to Europe in 2021. Okay, that's the volume of trade prior to the sanctions. Then I've got three possible denominators. And here's the thing. In the model, the first one is important. Okay, it's natural gas. How much natural gas is produced in the whole world? So world natural gas production in 2021 was 4,014 billion cubic meters. The Russian sales to Europe equate to 4% of that. So Russian sales to Europe are not very large in comparison to natural gas production around the world. Now, here's the thing. The model is an economic model. The three-nation model, Gardner and Kimbrough, that I use, is one of these things that assumes that everything that in the world is available for export and that the market is, instant communication, full knowledge, and most importantly, costless transport, right? Things just move. It's like I say, it's like the frictionless plane in physics, right? Things moving on a frictionless plane. Oh, what the hell? There is no such thing. But it's theoretically, that's what we got. For simplicity, for parsimony is the fancy term. So, point though is the 4% doesn't, not even close to being more than what's produced in the rest of the world, right? It would have to be 50%, right? 50% is the number theoretically. However, we know that the world isn't like that. So I always say it's not going to be, you're not going to meet that full condition, but 4% seems like not much. But wait, natural gas is weird. Natural gas is a gas and it likes to move through a pipeline. And so it's hard to export. So the thing is that most natural gas is consumed more or less where it's produced, in the nation it's produced in. So what's the right denominator here? If we take into account the real world complications. First cut, we could talk about how much natural gas is exported. What's the trade, the world trade, right? So how much stuff has legs to cross a border, right? And here, the total world trade in natural gas in 2021 was 16%, right? And so, okay, that's more. I mean, Russia's portion of that, the ratio here, right? 158 divided by 1017. Okay, this is where we're going with this. 16%. All right, that's more. But, and also, is that right? Because again, natural gas is annoying in that it's a gas, and it likes to move. It's not annoying, but it has this quirk that it likes to move through pipelines, right? Most exporting of natural gas is going to be done through pipelines, right? And that's certainly the most efficient way of doing it. And there are a lot of places where pipelines cross borders, right? And so that's your trade. But a pipeline can't move, right? And so, that's a very fixed, it goes from A to B, and it's not much useful. It's not like a ship or a truck or even a train, right? I mean, railroad tracks only go from A to B, but there's usually a network of them. These things you can ship to different places, right? Pipeline, shipping one thing to one place. So I said, hey, let's look at this. There is this thing called liquid natural gas, right? LNG. That's where you liquefy the natural gas and then you put it on a ship and then it can go anywhere in the world, right? That's the non-pipeline method of exporting stuff. So how much trade in liquid natural gas is there? And I know from kind of the term is casual observation, the Will Rogers, all I know is what I read in the newspapers, right? But I know from over the years, I've looked at this, not a serious study, but I've watched, I've been keeping track of this because I find it interesting. There's been a growth in liquid natural gas exports, but there's always been constraints. It takes a certain type of ship to move this stuff, and it takes port facilities. You have to take the natural gas, you have to liquefy it, cool it down and liquefy it. Then you pump it onto a ship, and the ship goes across the ocean. Interestingly, the natural gas is kind of evaporating, and the ship takes what evaporates out of the tanks and uses it to power itself. It's kind of cool. A little irrelevant. Sorry, tangential comment. Point is, that trade has been growing, but it's still limited. And only in 2020, which is the latest data I could find from, the first two figures were from IEA. Statista, a private site, gives me the information that liquid natural gas exports in 2020 were 488 billion cubic meters. And so, well, now 158 is 30, Russian exports to Europe are a much bigger proportion of that, right? And so that's an interesting figure. And I think the LNG figure is the one we should be using as the denominator, or be aware of it, because that's the natural gas that can move. And if Europe wants to replace, the IEA is saying, all right, you guys need to replace this Russian imports of natural gas. Well, there are some pipelines, but they're probably at capacity. And really, what they're doing, and they're building liquid natural gas facilities, but they're going to have to divert ships, right? And there's not an excess of ships out there. And so they're going to have to divert the liquid natural gas trade. 32%, now that's a lot, right? So now we're talking about moving 32% of the trade, whereas Russian trade in oil was a much smaller percentage, right? So this is, I think, a significant percentage, and probably they're going to have to outbid the current customers for natural gas, and so it's going to create some price disruptions, to say the least. So what are the takeaways? Russian natural gas exports to Europe are large, and by the way, they're roughly equal to the growth in LNG trade for 6 years, right? So if you wanted to grow the trade to cover Russia, right, the only way to not be stealing from Peter to pay Paul, right, stealing from basically Asian customers to fuel Europe, would be to expand the capacity. Now, capacity can expand faster than it did, but in the past, in looking at the data, it was about 6 years. Now, there was 1 year in there that was bigger than the other. So, but it's several years of growth, right, that this equals. So you would have to grow the LNG trade by several years worth quickly to cover this. So, like I say, that's another way of getting a sense of what the impact's going to be. Another word, so bottom line, sanctions on natural gas should be more painful than oil, right? Much more painful, and they're going to throw, shockwaves in it. Now, I got to put an asterisk here. If you're in the United States, natural gas, because of the differences, right? We have cheap natural gas because we are sitting on an amazing amount of natural gas. And fracking was controversial, but it's produced cheap natural gas in the United States, much cheaper than the rest of the world. All of these shipping problems mean that you can't export it. There isn't a global price for natural gas the way there is a global price for oil, right? So the U.S. should be insulated. There are local prices for gas. We will probably not have the pain that Europe's going to have, right? So the prices in Europe are going to be, whoa, and going to be much more painful. So the question is this an effective counter-sanction? Economically, yes, right? This is the thing. And looking at this is the sanction. And for that reason, Europe has been reluctant to employ it, right? Europe has come around to an oil embargo or an oil boycott, but natural gas, and Russia is in fact been counter-sanctioning, right? They've been saying, oh, you got to pay us. They're already doing stuff. I think you got to pay us in rubles for this if you want our gas, and so it's been the centerpiece of Russian reaction. Is it politically effective? And here's the bottom here, or well, it's not the bottom line, but the thing that I think is always interesting. It's one thing to cause pain through a sanction. It's another thing to get the desired result with that pain. Because sometimes you cause pain and you get unintended results, right? Backlash. And if Putin, let's think about this, right? If Putin embargoes natural gas beyond what Europe's willing to do, it's going to cause pain in Europe. Is that going to be effective? Right? It's one thing if the EU governments say, oh, we're going to sanction gas, and then the public goes, well, you chose to do this. So we're kind of, you might get pushback against the whole effort against Russia. On the other hand, if Russia embargoes, well, now they're cutting off, and we're pissed, or the Europeans are pissed. And we'll see some impact, so we'll be pissed too. But in the U.S., but the point is that going to be effective? And what's your goal, right? Are you going to get Europe to stop doing? You haven't. What's the actual goal of this, right? Are you trying to beat Europe and to make them, give up to your strategic ambitions and realize that they have to put up with you? or acquiesce to you taking over parts of Ukraine. It's not clear what the goal is, right? We don't even know what the end state is. So in sanctioning, in the cost benefit bargaining analysis, it's always important to have a clear-cut demand that's being made, right, in that model. But when we move beyond the model, the bloodless cost benefit model that's basically economic and rational actors and people making decisions in that way, when we move into a more psychological thing, well, and what's the impact on Europe, right? You're going to demonstrate that you're not a reliable supplier of natural gas, clear, and that you're using your power against them. And so again, it's kind of like, you invade Finland, you invade Ukraine, and Finland and Sweden decide to join NATO, right? You say, oh, we don't want Ukraine to be part of NATO, and then you get Finland becoming part of NATO, right? Backlash. The question is here, is this going to be more of the same, right? You're showing yourself to be a more dangerous figure, especially if it's an embargo. Like I say, it shouldn't make a difference in the bloodless models, in the emotionless models, I should say. But in the more, normal way of things, where people's actions have an impact on the identity, if we go more like with constructivism, the actions of Russia, them being the initiator of an embargo, could have a political ramification, and it might run counter to the broader goals that Putin may or may not have. I think he's just going to reveal himself to be more the czar wannabe, right? And that is going to, just remind people why they're pissed at him and why they need to fight. The key thing with a democracy is the democracy is strong as long as it's unified against you. And doing things like this just unifies. I think the mistake that authoritarians make is we will hurt them and they will cower. And it's like, no, you got to give them rope and let them hang yourself. All right, that's a very off the cuff. That's a short rant. But I wonder if I could do, it's you can't hang them. You got to give them the rope, right? And let them do it themselves. Abraham Lincoln said, if a nation such as the United States is to die, it must be by by suicide, right? So he had some better way of putting it when he talking about civil war. So I think there's some aspect to that democracies are, need to be undermined, and external threats, maybe not impossible, but not the best way. All right, that was a long, short rant, but I hope, some of these things I think are important, and I hope you found it useful. Thank you for listening to my short rant. I'm Dr. Dave Hayes, and though I teach at Troy University, this video is my own work. Troy University has neither approved nor reviewed the content, so there. And if you want to follow me on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, please feel free. And if you're wondering who would employ a guy like this, or maybe you'd love to be a student, it's not an ad, but I would love to have more students. Feel free to check us out at www.troy.edu, and we're going to end up finishing off listening to Tonight at 8 by Shane Ivers.